So in a previous video, I used the idea of a surveyor, and I compared that to our class. We're going to be surveying communication studies. And what a surveyor does, right, is they go out to like a construction site or a set of land, and they examine it and lay it out visually so that it can be mapped, find its different contours and how the land is arranged. And I want to take that metaphor even further in this video. And I want us to imagine that all of the knowledge that's produced by different subject areas for study is arranged in a certain way in one organized field. And I want to ask ourselves, where is communication studies then in relationship to the other kinds of studies that there are? Where is it in this organized field of human knowledge? There's lots of different ways in which we organize knowledge or organize the study of certain subjects. We might look to something like a library for how they're organizing their books to get a sense of how we might arrange knowledge. We can think about how different universities do it with the various academic subjects that are organized into departments, that are organized into colleges, right? So the College of Science, the College of Business, for example. So I encourage you to think about all these ways in which we organize knowledge. I'm going to propose this kind of schema here, and it might be familiar to some of you. And it looks something like this. I usually give my students in my face-to-face class a little worksheet, and I have them fill this out. We'll kind of do this together instead today. But before we get into filling it out, let's just try to understand what exactly we have before us here. So I've arranged in six different main subject groups, and I've arranged them in a certain order from the subject areas that try to produce more universal, objective knowledge, and subject areas that are more concerned with producing cultural, individual, or subjective kinds of knowledges. And on the far left, you'll see math next to the universal. At its purest form, math is, just mental reasoning of mathematic propositions. It doesn't require observation of the world. You're not looking at complex systems. You are trying to just create mathematical laws, right? And with science, we're trying to find the laws of the universe, the laws of that govern physical matter here on Earth. And as we move away and get towards the other side of the spectrum, we are at the very end, far right. Actually, I think it's that way on this video. I think it records backwards. On the far right, you'll see the humanities and art, right? And so you think about these as trying to really express the individual experience of a human being, what it's like to be alive, to have a body, to experience color and sound and dance and things like that. So we have math, science, applied science, human, or what we might also call social science, and then applied social science, which is not a very popular term, but you'll see in a second what I mean by applied social science. And then lastly, humanities and art. So I'm going to give you a little quiz here, and you can follow along and try to guess where you would place these things, where I end up placing them. I will say that these aren't clear-cut categories or clear-cut distinctions, that things bleed over. And so the way I arrange this might not be the same way other people arrange it. Let's start with just kind of going across the top and seeing one subject area in each of these. We'll start with math. So when you think of math, of course, we might think of mathematical logic, just pure mathematical logic. Physics in science. For applied sciences, something like architecture, right, where you are using the principles of physics to apply it to building something. A human or social science might be something like psychology. And if you were wondering what I meant by applied social science, here is an example of that: social work. And lastly, an example of the humanities and arts might be history. So the word humanities means the study of what it means to be a human being. And then, of course, you know what art is. Okay, so that gives us an idea of each of these kind of areas, and hopefully you're already beginning to populate these different columns with subject areas that you think might go in them. I'm going to say one, and then I want you to try to guess where it goes, and then I'll show you where I think it goes. Okay, so first one I want you to guess is sociology. Where would you place sociology on the math, science, applied science, human social science, applied social science, and humanities art kind of spectrum? I would put it here, right, as a social science. We're trying to study society, so it's social scientific. What about geometry? Geometry. Okay, probably math. That's an easy one, I think. Where would you put education on this schema? Education could go. It's also called sometimes pedagogy. I would put it over here in our applied social sciences. You want to know about psychology and learning, you need to know about sociology, but you're taking those and you're applying it into the classroom. What about chemistry? Where would we place chemistry? A science, yes, those are easy ones, I think. Medicine, maybe is a science. I'm going to put it over here in applied science. A lot of times you're dealing with the human body and diagnosing, and so the practice of medicine is more of an implied science. It's a little messier than just straight up chemistry, right? Where would you put literature here? Okay, humanities and art, right? The study of literature is going to tell you a lot about what it means to be a human being, and it is itself an artistic practice. Okay, that leads us to the main question in this video, which is, where do you think we would put communication studies, the study of communication, on this spectrum? Probably not math, right? You can probably guess it's not going to be one of the hard sciences and applied sciences. Maybe. Most people are going to place, I would say, the study of communication somewhere on the right side of our spectrum. And actually, if you're having trouble deciding, that's maybe indicative of something that you're sensing, which is that communication doesn't really fit neatly into any of these. And so I'm going to put them in all three and say that different communication scholars approach communication very differently. There are many communication scholars who treat communication like a social science. They are using the scientific method to study how people communicate. If you thought of the psychological model that I talked about in a previous video, those who use the psychological model are probably going to be treating communication like a social science. Communication is also an applied social science, and I would put this in the area of all the technical aspects of communications, broadcasting, as well as in the practice of PR, public relations. So these are your communication practitioners, and the study of how to be a communication practitioner. And then on the far right, in the humanities, there are definitely several scholars, and this is how I learned, this is what the school that I went to really focused on, was communication as a form of art, as a type of art, where you brought the whole of humanities to bear in order to understand how humans communicate with one another. And so wanted to just take you through that exercise and have you think about where communication falls. And if you were wanting a more complete list, I have one here. Again, not everybody's going to agree with all of these arrangements that I've made here. For example, a lot of people would want to put philosophy not as a social science, but even somewhere over towards the mathematical end. There are people who, there are scholars who approach philosophy like mathematical logic. Philosophy could span all of these, you might argue. Some people might not agree with where I've put economics as well as in human and social science. Some people want to say economics is more of like a science, or you could argue it's an applied science. Anyways, take a look, get a sense of thought, human thought, and how we might organize it.